So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third Digital Intimacy Mini Symposia on Digital Intimacy, Young Women and Social Transformation in Asia. I'm Denise Tang from Cultural Studies at Lingnan University. We have a research team on this project, and most of them are here with us online right now. Tajaswini Nirajana from Ahmedabad University, Riddhi Lucas from NYU Gallatin, Audrey Yu from National University of Singapore, Nitya Vasudevan from Azim Prajim University, Holly Hao from South China Agricultural University, and Bai Mei Jie Dai from Liaoning University. We also, of course, have a team of research assistants helping us, Manyin Cho, Farah Bawani, Chamayi Ramaya, who is part of this project. So welcome, everyone. This qualitative ethnographic project looks at how young women understand and experience intimacy in the age of social media. We are, as a team, carrying out a multi-sited study of young university-going women in 4 cities, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Singapore, and Bangalore, chosen, of course, for the high percentage of social media usage in Asia among women in the 18 to 24 age group. Our project really aims to track 120 women, 30 in each of the 4 locations over 2 years, to find out how young college-going women cultivate a digital persona of themselves and how such personae forge new ways of negotiating and navigating the realms of courtship and marriage, kinship, family, and tertiary education. The research is supported by the Research Grants Council, Hong Kong, and hosted by the Center for Cultural Research and Development, a research center affiliated with Lingnan University's Department of Cultural Studies. Our moderator for this third session is one of our research team member, Professor Audrey Yu from National University of Singapore. So I'll right now turn the mic over to you, Audrey.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm Audrey. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's session. So welcome, everyone, to the third session of our mini symposia on digital intimacy, young women, and social transformation in Asia. So as with the previous 2 iterations, we have 2 very exciting speakers for this evening. They're both researching and writing at the forefront on gender, sexuality, and internet studies. So now let me introduce our 2 speakers in the order of their speaking. Our first speaker, Carman Fung, is a teaching associate at the University of Melbourne in Australia. She completed her PhD in 2021, also at the same university, at the University of Melbourne, on the topic of contemporary conceptualizations of the tomboy identity in lesbian communities in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And early sections of her dissertation on the shifting discourses of authentic desire appear in the Journal of Lesbian Studies. And this is a 2021 publication, volume 25, issue number 2. So you can check out the journal and download her article to read if you're interested to know more about her research. So please join me to welcome both our speakers, and I now would like to invite Carman to speak.
Right, thank you, Audrey, for the introduction, and my thanks to the research team for the invitation to speak here with you today. I'm very happy to share some of the preliminary research findings from my PhD project. So this title for my paper today is called Strategic Identities, Chinese and Hong Kong Young Women's Self-Presentation on Lesbian Dating Apps. So I want to start by giving you just an idea of how popular lesbian dating apps are in these societies. So the first lesbian dating app developed locally in China is called Raila. Raila was launched in 2012 and was initially named the L after the English words lesbian and love. As of 2017, just 5 years after it debuted, 5 million users have registered on Raila, so it's very, very popular. And like many of the dating apps that you might have come across, it's a GPS-based app, so it allows you to find other users who are in close geographic and physical proximity. And one of the main purpose of the app, as indicated by its association with the word lesbians and love, it's for users to find a match, right? According to the developers, it was specifically created for queer women to find romantic partners, so that they can so that they can no longer have to be single. Another mainly Chinese app, LESDO, shares a similar purpose and a similar history. So LESDO was launched in 2013, just 1 year later, and have 1.5 registered users as at 2016, among which 225,000 are daily users. And like the other app, it's also geo-based, GPS-based, and shows you a grid-like page consisting of the profile pictures of other users in your areas, as you can see here. And it's primarily used for sexual and romantic encounters, even though it does serve other purpose. So yeah, so people do use it to make friends, to find out news about the communities, etc., etc. But one of the key features is to find a match, essentially. Elsewhere in Hong Kong, the lesbian app Butterfly was launched again in the same year in 2013. And it being Hong Kong mobile technology, it's very, very widely available in the city. And within a year, the app already had 3 million users. So unlike the other two, this one's actually not GPS based, but the majority, 70% of the users are based in Hong Kong, which is obviously quite small and easily sort of accessible from one part to the other. So presumably most of these users out of those 70% can easily reach each other and meet in person as well. So at this point, I want to pause a little bit and sort of invite you to imagine that you're signing up for these apps. So if you could try to picture yourself as a young queer woman in Hong Kong, you're in your early 20s, and you're eager to go out and date. And so you just downloaded this lesbian dating app, Butterfly, that your friend's been telling you about over and over, and you're trying to set up a profile. So you put down your name, your age, a profile picture, and that's sort of quite typical. But then Butterfly asks you this really strange questions. What label are you? And you're given 4 choices, essentially. So tomboy, TB, would indicate that you're a masculine presenting queer woman seeking a feminine presenting woman, seeking a feminine partner. And then on the other side, TBG would indicate that you're a feminine woman seeking a tomboy, so seeking a TB, seeking a masculine partner. And then you can also identify as pure, which would suggest that you are a feminine woman looking for other feminine women. So TB and TBG pairs up, and then pure woman looks for other pure woman. You can alternatively identify as no label, so you're not specifying your gender presentation or the gender presentation of your potential match. So just to give you an image, that's what your profile would look like. So that's the name, and then these are promotional pictures from the app. Your picture, your TBG, pure, TB, age, etc., etc. And now, switching to China, again, picture yourself as a young woman trying to set up a profile on LESDO or on Raila, and you're given a very similar choice. So you can choose between T, again, a masculine person looking for a feminine partner. The other side, P, a feminine partner looking for a masculine person, a match. And H, so you're halfway between them, or neither, or you're available for people who are both T and P. And this is what your profile would look like. So you'll be a P, you're a Leo, your height, your age, so on and so forth. And that's the Greek-like page for all of the potential matches in your area. So what I want to understand today, it's the logic behind these labels, essentially. So what are identity labels and how are they used on lesbian dating apps? How do users conceptualize and how do they feel about these identity labels? What are the broader implications for thinking about identity and digital intimacy? What do these examples tell us about dating app, perhaps more generally? And on the other side, what might be culturally specific about these examples? What is unique to these examples and perhaps not generalizable to other cultural contexts? So I'll start by giving you a very brief literature review looking at the history of these terms. But the sort of main body of this paper will be drawing from 5 individual face-to-face semi-structured interviews with 2 mainland Chinese participants and 3 Hong Kong participants. These participants are in their mid-20s to 30s, and they were interviewed in 2018 in Shanghai and Hong Kong, in Mandarin Chinese and Cantonese Chinese. The interviews are transcribed and went through 2 cycles of coding. So this term actually predates the introduction of the dating app. So the dating app only came into the scene in 2012, 2013. The term tomboy in Hong Kong can be traced back to the 1970s. And the exact meaning of the term at the time was actually quite controversial. So according to Zhao San, he suggested that at the time, TB was a gender identity conceptualized in opposition to femininity and not heterosexuality. So according to him, it was used by people who were assigned female at birth, but did not identify as women. And so it's quite similar to what we would now call a transgender subjectivity. But according to Franco Lai, she suggested that rather than it being a gender identity or a transgender identity, it was actually a subcategory of lesbian. So according to her, it described a type of lesbian who draws from normative masculinity without necessarily identifying as masculine or as male. And quite possibly both of these usage could be true to different people. And the term TBG would have emerged at around the same time, even though we don't exactly know when and where. And they were in use all the way until today, obviously. And the sort of earlier online usage could be traced back to the 90s when lesbian boards were becoming more popular in Hong Kong with the introduction of the internet. And so all the way to the mid-2000s, the third category, pure, emerged originally as this unidentifiable alternative. So in its original incarnation, pure would refer to someone who is neither a tomboy, neither a TB or a TBG, neither masculine or feminine, and it could be open to dating someone who's masculine or feminine or neither. But then that meaning changed around the time that dating apps emerged in the 2010s. So currently it refers specifically to feminine women seeking other feminine women. So the understanding is that pure women only look for other pure women, and no label emerged at the same time to replace it as this unidentifiable alternative. And the history in China is quite similar. So I've talked to a number of women who began to have internet access in the 90s, in the mid to late 90s in Southeast coastal cities in China, such as Guangzhou and Shanghai. And so they were telling me that they learned the term T and P from Hong Kong and actually from Taiwan as well. So you notice that I use those terms interchangeably, and that's because that's how they're used for women who cross the border between China and Hong Kong as well. So they understand T as the same as TB, so referring to the masculine partner, and P as the equivalent of TBG in Hong Kong, referring to the feminine partner. And so these terms have again been used since then on the internet when queer lesbian internet first emerged in urban parts of China. And then in 2010s, when the dating app began to replace online discussion boards as the primary way for women to talk to each other. That's also at around the time that H emerged as this halfway point between T and P. So quite similar. And so drawing from previous literature that looks specifically on lesbian dating apps in China and Hong Kong, they were quite critical of the limits of this labeling system that the apps imposed on users. So Denise actually wrote a paper earlier noting that these labeling system in fact limits the imaginative connections that users might have. It forecloses the possibility for other forms of sexual desire. So there's a lot of implicit rules as to who should be attracted to who and how attraction should be playing out on this platform. And Samlet Chen, our colleagues at CHK, wrote that the developers falsely assume that a user can only have one fixed identity and that they can only have one identity at a given time. So both those papers specifically look at the limitation of these apps. But today I want to sort of build on that discussion and ask, so how do users actually deal with these limitations? And I'll read you some quotes from the interviews. And this is from Kit, a 34-year-old retailer from Hong Kong who identify as pure. Kit actually originally identified as a tomboy, but then started to shift her identification over the years and now see herself as primarily a feminine woman who only dates other feminine women. And that comes through in the quote as well. So she said, on Butterfly, a lot of tomboy, a lot of TB, masculine TB, approached pure and then gets turned down. But the fact is that pure don't date TB and they only date other pure women. So it's like a hiring manager may post a job advertisement specifying that potential candidates will have to have an engineering degree. So someone with a journalism degree applied and then get really upset that they're not considered. And that doesn't make sense. And a similar quote from Mui, who's a 25-year-old mainland Chinese activist and an NGO worker. So she told me, on LESDO and Raila, people would just assume that a T is only looking for a P. So someone who's masculine would look for someone who's feminine. Even though the app actually allows you to be a T looking for potential T partners. So you can identify as a T and then screen for other T partners. But in practice, that's virtually impossible, because if you identify as a T, people would just assume that you're looking for someone who's feminine. But so she said, I've been using this app for a year, and it's very confusing for me to guess what people mean by these labels. Because these labels don't just describe your gender presentations, but also your preferred sexual positions. A T might indicate one's preference for being the penetrating partner in sex. And so the P feminine label would refer to the penetrated partner, and H would be someone who can switch between those positions. But what people don't understand is that these sexual roles don't necessarily correspond with gender presentation. And it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating to me that we just use them interchangeably. So I think one of the key findings, just from these two quotes, and I'll get into the other ones, is that self-presentation using these labels are actually primarily a way for these users to screen out unwanted partners. So going back to Kit's example, identifying as a pure, describing yourself as a pure automatically screens out someone who's masculine, other people who aren't pure. So in that sense, limitations, the fact that the system limits the kind of interactions that they can have with other users may in fact be quite desirable, especially so for Kit. So it's especially usable and desirable for people who crave specific forms of intimacy, who crave specific forms of sexual interactions, sexual roles, or who have in mind very specific gender presentations that they want a future partners to have. So it's useful in that way. In fact, they may find it really frustrating when the labels themselves don't have stable and unambiguous symbolic meanings. So going back to MPhil's examples, the fact that it described at once sexual role and gender presentation is something that she finds really frustrating, because it's impossible to get to know someone easily just by looking at their label if we cannot agree on what those labels mean. So the clearer the meaning and the more limiting, in fact, the meanings, the better these labels serve as partner affecting tools. And so let's look at another quote. This is from Sofia, who's a 36-year-old educator from Shanghai who did not personally identify with any label until she was forced to, she was using these apps. So she told me, well, I've always known about this label, so way before she started using them, but I never thought they were relevant to how I saw myself, you know? It was not until my first relationship was over and my friend encouraged me to download the app to look for someone new. And then I realized that I had to pick a label for myself. I was really quite shocked. So I went with H. So in this case, I argue that users, Sofia, was actually interpolated into the position of identity labels. So drawing from Althusser's very influential theory about interpolations, the idea that we are called into a subject position in social interactions. I argue that it's not that users are essentially a T, a P, a H, or TP, or TB, TBG, or all the other labels. They become an H, or they become a TP pure through using these systems. So in fact, they are constructing this new sense of self through using the app's labeling system. And even label-less alternatives such as H or no label in this sense still function as a subject position within the system. So for Sofia to identify herself as an H in this context still is a process that requires her to identify herself, even though the label itself supposedly refers to the unidentifiable. And so looking at other similar quotes, this is from Penelope, who's a 39-year-old social worker from Hong Kong who did not identify with any of these labels. So she said, well, I said on my profile that I was a TBG, but I don't really see myself as a TBG. I just wanted to see what would happen if I said I was one. Because I'm quite certain that the people that I am attracted to would describe themselves as TB. So this is the best way to get their attentions. But in fact, my belief is that we should not use these labels at all. And from a different participant, for Piper, who's also from Hong Kong, 27-year-old financial planner who identifies as no label. On Butterfly, I am no label. On her, so there's this much less popular British English language lesbian dating app that also operates in Hong Kong that doesn't use this system. On her, the options that you get are completely different. When I first started using her, I just left the sexuality label checkbox blank, but nobody would match with me. In the dating field, labels are useful because they tell strangers what they can expect from you. On Butterfly, no label functions like a label. You're telling them that you reject labels, that you have this attitude of refusing the other labels. It's not quite the same as literally leaving the checkbox blank. So this is, I think, what I would call a strategic kind of self-presentation, and that's drawing from a long lineage of dating app research and self-presentation on dating apps. But essentially, the idea is that users try to create the right impression for the right audience and to screen out desirable matches. And there's an intentional packaging and editing of the self. And they take advantage of the functions provided by the platform, in this case, the labeling system, to create the right image for the right audience. At the same time, this gives users a sense of restricted agencies because they have to use labels as an effective partner vetting tool, but it also requires them to self-present in a way that sometimes contradicts with their actual perceptions. In Penelope's case, like she's not actually a TBG, but feels like she has to present as a TBG. At the same time, she actively maintains this private sense of self. So there's the idea that I'm not actually this, but on this platform, I am this. At the same time, users may perceive these labels as linguistic necessities. They are powerful social requirements to make themselves knowable to the other users in the economy of digital dating. And I'll wrap up very soon. But so what might be, and the things I outlined that are obviously universalizable translatable to other dating app circumstances outside of China and Hong Kong. And so I'm trying to think of what might be culturally specific or transnational here. And I think the example with Her, the British app in Hong Kong, is particularly interesting because as Piper suggested, the app does not have the same appeal precisely because it doesn't have the same labeling system. And in fact, she was telling me that she saw other people writing no TB, no this, no that on Her profile where the system is not available. So it's a very interesting case of this Western app being localized in that sense. And that's some of the sort of early observations that I can think of. And that's the end of my research, and I'll appreciate all the comments and feedback that I'm sure you'll throw at me soon. Thanks.